Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhant Ani and you're watching Daily Debrief. Like we were saying yesterday, we're taking this week to round up the biggest stories in some of the biggest sectors that have had the most impact across the world. Today we're talking energy, and in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war that has been on for over 300 days now, the focus has shifted a little bit from the immediate concern of mitigating human-induced climate change and other energy-related issues to more immediate geopolitical requirements and of course food security and things like that. But we are talking about how 2022 looked for the energy sector, what were the major talking points, and what is, at least according to several commentators and experts, a clear divide between who is responsible for the most impact in terms of human-induced climate change, who is facing the brunt, and who will pay for a shift to cleaner energy. Prabir Purkaisa has written and reported extensively on the subject throughout his career, and this year has been no exception, particularly in the context of COP27, which was held in Egypt, where the world's leaders met in the context of the war and everything else that's going on. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what he believes were the main or the biggest stories from the energy sector for the year that is about to end. Prabir, good to have you for perhaps the last time for this year in our studios. We can get straight into it because you have, I think, a pretty clear idea on what you consider the most important talking points as far as the world's energy security is concerned.
I think two aspects which you've already outlined. One is the sector itself, without taking into consideration what are the long-term consequences of the path we are following with respect to climate change, global warming, etc. The other is, just if we take this year, what has been the energy economics, what have been the geopolitical implications of energy, and also what is the hit some of the economies have taken due to the Ukraine war, but as a consequence of the oil price and the gas embargoes which have been introduced in this specific case against Russia. So these are all, though they come as a mixed bag at the end of the year, but they're really two different kinds of time frames.
Right.
One is an immediate one, the war. The other is a longer time frame. How much time does humanity have in order to solve the problem of human-induced climate change, as you've called it?
Right.
So if you look at the picture of the longer issue, now let's take that first, because COP27 did have an end.
Yeah.
It will again take place next year. So we have some things we can say are the outcome of COP27, and the outcomes are not very happy. Though there has been again, what shall we say, commitments made which are really lip service at one level. But the real issue of stopping below 2 degrees centigrade, there is no chance that we seem to see for that happening. That is one part of it. The other part that you've talked about, I'll come to in just a little while. The question is, who is going to bear the burden, who has got the benefit, and who will pay the price, the three questions that you've raised. But I'd like to look at the other part of the issue, which is that the advanced countries, the rich countries, have been painting the transition of using gas as a transitional fuel. Now, somebody calling it natural gas itself is a problem.
Misnomer.
It's a misnomer. It's like calling coal natural carbon. So it really doesn't have anything to say for that. So the fact is, fossil fuel, whether it is so-called natural gas or it is coal, both have global warming potential. It was thought that gas has about maybe half of what the coal global warming potential is when it is converted to carbon dioxide, each of them being converted to carbon dioxide. But what was always left out of the reckoning is what is the cost of global warming because of what are called fugitive emissions. Now that takes place when you mine for natural gas, drill. When you get the natural gas, you convert it to LNG. All of these systems have leaks, and when you convert to LNG, you actually evaporate the gas to keep it cold. So given all of this, what happens is methane emissions from methane without burning also takes place. And if it is about 2% of what is finally used, then that would automatically mean that the global warming potential of this is going to exceed carbon dioxide. So therefore, calling it a transitional fuel without taking these methane emissions into account is itself a wrong calculation, because in one case you are taking, you're really leaving out a very large chunk of what is the global warming potential of methane, because methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than coal, though it lasts for much longer. But you know, if it lasts for 80 years, 100 years, that's it. The end of civilization. So that is therefore not a criteria when you're talking of very short-term issues. So this is one major issue, because all the oil companies who launched a rearguard battle to deny global warming itself, carbon dioxide, no, all of this, they took a defensive measure of saying, calling it first natural gas and saying, okay, natural gas is a transitional fuel, not a fossil fuel, in spite of the fact that, of course, you find it underground just the way you find fossil coal. So fossil carbon, but not fossil methane gas. So these are the strategies that the oil companies, and in this case largely Western oil companies, have worked out as a public relations exercise. A lot of the documents have just come out. So they are in public realm at the moment, that first from denial of climate change to naming it transitional fuel, all of this, and calling it natural gas. All of this is to say we should do business as usual for as long as we can.
The wonders of modern marketing. Praveen, a quick question, because you're talking about how the sort of narrative has been built. Is some of the, or can we infer that some of the point of this is to shift the blame for what is happening currently to countries like India and China, which are developing countries and are sort of heavier on their consumption of coal than the West, which has shifted more and more to this transitional fuel, as you're calling it?
Yeah, so in fact, the differentiation between coal and methane, the real issue was to say, we are now becoming good. The bad guys are not us anymore. Okay, historically, we didn't know that this is bad, though that's strictly not true. The last 50 years, 60 years is when everybody has known this. So then the last 50, 60 years are actually much more a part of the global warming effect than all the earlier emissions that we have seen. So the idea is to say, we are now becoming good. We are using transitional fuel. Coal is bad. So therefore, how bad is methane vis-a-vis coal becomes the issue. And that's why I'm raising this issue, that this year, now we are finding how much really methane is leaking. And from the American fields, there's a detailed study done using, it's very easy now to, if you can find from the infrared cameras, also you can find this even from exoplanets. As you know, this is what the Hubble and the later telescope, which has now been launched, James Webb telescope. We've discussed this. You can see the carbon monoxide, all of this spectra, even on Earth. So monitoring this from the space using satellites, child's play. So this has been done. And the New Mexico shows that it is leaking to the extent of 5%. That's really well above anything that you would do with burning coal. So this is not true. But the PR, as you said, the marketing exercise is very good. So this is the story. Coal is bad. Transitional fuel, natural gas is clean. We can't see it. Therefore, it must be better than coal, which looks dirty. So all of this is coming in. And of course, this is that any country now, like India and China, without a gas or a natural gas reserve, will have a huge issue. Now, China has little more oil than we have. We have virtually none. Whatever we have, we seem to have used up, and we don't find any other sources. So therefore, India will be really much more pressed to do the transition without using coal. So the issue should not be whether it is coal or it is gas. Issue is how much global warming are you causing or have you caused. Now, I don't think any country expects equity, meaning that in the future, if we take all the emissions into account, we will get what we would call a just share of our energy. We are not talking about a just share of carbon space, forget that.
Right.
Just share of energy, meaning do we have the right to produce energy the way we want, and what is the cost to that.
Right.
So we are going to have much more expensive energy for this purpose, not because renewable is not cheap. Renewable is cheap, because storage is going to be the problem. Like, we think of coal and natural gas as sources. They're really stores of energy because nature has produced it out of solar energy, and that's what is stored in the fossil fuels, as we call it. So the store, as a store of energy, it's very energy rich. 1 kg of oil will take you a long distance. 1 kg of a battery will not power your car even. So even if it does, probably not very long distance,
very far.
but far on that. So that is the problem we have, and storage is the key bottleneck, not the amount. Cost of nuclear renewables has come down, but the seasonal variations can be large. It's not the daily variations. For grid storage, batteries of grid storage capacity are available. It's possible to do that. Storing it for 3 months, 1 month, 20 days, that's the problem. So long-term source of storage is our problem. Batteries is not the solution. Storing it in what is called reversible hydro turbines, that's possible. We have large reservoirs already built. The bottom reservoir is only small because you pump up and let it again come down. So this is a reversible battery cycle in that sense. So that's easy to do. But the point is that if that is not enough, then what happens? And then we have to look at really other new sources like hydrogen, converting it, storing it as hydrogen, which is possible. So those are all the issues which are yet to be cracked. The hydro-reversible storage for India is possible, and that's something India should explore much more aggressively than they are doing now. Instead of that, they're falling into, the public relations trap of multinational to say grid level storage using batteries. Without realizing that does not solve your larger seasonal fluctuations, which are the key issues.
Right. And we also see this major drive towards electric vehicles, and we've seen, of course, in this year, Tesla stock for perhaps other reasons has tanked, but we've seen what valuations that particular company had reached in 2021 at least. A lot of this technology, though it might be available, Prabir, sounds very capital intensive, very expensive. And rightly, therefore, countries like India and China are leading the conversation for the West, those who have historically contributed the most towards greenhouse gas emissions, to take up some of that burden. How did that conversation proceed in 2022?
That along with the gas as transitional fuel, this would be gas as transitional assurances for the next year. So the assurances don't stop. Reality is hardly any finance is available. Let's be very clear. India and China are not going to get any money out of this. The transitional financing we are talking about is really going to go to largely very poor countries which also have actually fossil fuel but are not able to use it. So they are the ones who can be subsidized from these funds. Chances of China, of course, is zero. Chances of India also is going to be pretty low. Okay, because you are seen to be a big economy, therefore. So you are put on par with China. If you look at per capita income, we are much lower. It's really much lower. Or forget about the West. But the point is, the amount of money that the West has promised and not delivered continues to grow, but the delivery still remains very low. And delivery is actually tying it to financing, which will be given from the West as loans, and they will be considered as if it is aid. So this is the other part. It is also saying we'll invest, but the investment will be counted as financing, but the investments that will be owned by the Western companies. So in fact, this might be, again, a neo-colonial expansion to capture the energy sectors in Africa. So that might very well be one of the consequences of this. We'll have to wait and watch, because African countries are by no means stupid.
Yeah.
So they are also aware of the game that the West is trying to play. They have already protested against it, particularly when Nordic countries said, we'll help you develop oil and gas, but you have to only give it to us. So as somebody wrote, gas for we, not for thee. Okay, so those are the kind of things that we will see, which are really neocolonialism in a rather crude form, in the name of climate finance.
Right. Moving on to sort of immediate circumstances, geopolitics that you were referring to, the impact of the war, and also what it has done to the US and its allies, with the US sort of ticking off oil-producing countries off its list of friends one by one. It's not doing itself any favors, of course, but at the same time, it's also expecting at least a large chunk of the world to go along with it and support its idea of foreign policy or maintenance of its hegemony, however you want to sort of verbalize that. That we saw getting intensified or maybe a bit more complex this year with
I will say this year has been a turning point.
Yeah.
You see, initially it was thought that we have a global economic order which is ordered through the trade rules which the WTO sets in place. All that has been sort of thrown out of the window. What we now have are rules which are what G7 says, the international order as dictated by us. So we decide what are the international order, we decide the rules. Now, two sets of issues have come. Of course, the fulcrum of that is probably the Ukraine war, but it is really something which was building up before, which is what happens to West Asia politically. And you can see, as you said, a number of oil countries, hydrocarbon countries have been sanctioned. One is Venezuela, Iran, of course, much earlier, and then we now have Russia added to the list. Now, Russia is the second biggest producer or exporter of oil today. So it's not a small player.
No.
At the same time, if Russia is taken out of the market, then OPEC, other countries have to produce more. So the US was telling other countries, that particularly Saudi Arabia, you produce more so that Russia can be sanctioned out of the market. Now that game, the oil countries are not willing to play, because if you today sanction Russia, nothing to prevent you from sanctioning anybody else.
Yeah.
You've already done Venezuela, Iran on different counts. Now
Pretext,
this,
excuses.
now this. So tomorrow, any country, you have to just find the proper pretext. So they have now got their back up and said, no, we will decide in the interest of larger OPEC. That's the line they have taken. So the fracturing that has taken place is the West Asian oil countries, minus Iran, because that was already at the target, minus Libya, which has been destroyed, minus, of course, Venezuela, which is not a part of this region. So the West Asian region, which is the other major oil producing set of countries, including, of course, Algeria, which is across the ocean, little bit of ocean. So if you take all of them put together, they have said, no, we will decide on our own. And they, for the first time, seem to have broken out of America's tutelage. And that is particularly, the fulcrum of that is really the Saudi-US relationship, which seems to have soured. Might have soured because Khashoggi's murder and Saudi Arabia coming under the scanner. But Saudi Arabia's anti-democratic policies, sectarian politics of crushing also the Shia communities, which are also significant in Saudi Arabia. It's been there for a long time, apart from its very regressive policies regarding women and immigrants. So all that is there. It's never bothered the United States. Like, for instance, the women question, Iran has always bothered them. So this fulcrum this time seems to have decisively shifted away from the United States, and they seem to be saying, okay, we'll decide our future ourselves. Now that is a big and a huge issue for the United States, because ability to sanction Russia means that you should also be able to sanction all those who do not accept the Russian sanctions. Now, if the oil countries are willing to buck the United States, then their ability to sanction each of these countries is not there. So we might be reaching a watershed moment where the energy policies will become really relatively free of the United States, particularly the oil policies, and therefore this might lead to a change. We already have seen the other net impact that it has created, which is the Western Europe, European Union. European Union was getting cheap gas from Russia, piped gas. Now with actually piped gas being sanctioned first, earlier you remember the dollar earnings or euro earnings were taken away. Then they said we'll only pay you in euros or dollars, which means we'll pay you but keep the money here.
Use the money.
You can't, we'll keep the money with us. Now that after $300 billion of confiscation, that's not a very good idea for Russia. So they said no. So this kind of situation which European Union is facing means that the cheap resource that they had, which was piped gas, which meant that industrially they are competitive on a whole bunch of sectors. It's fertilizers, metallurgical sector, which all of them are energy intensive. So all of those, if gas goes, also go. So they have already shut down. So now the prices that we see have fallen. One of the reasons for this in Europe is what is called demand destruction. Industries have stopped. There's a huge effect on the German economy. But this is something European Union is facing as a whole. And so you shift from piped gas to LNG, price can go up to 3 to 4 times. The oil price rose, now it has fallen again. But if you try to get Russia out of the market as the United States wants, prices will rise again. So given all of this, net hit to the economy has been taken by European Union. India and China, which were the other two big importers of Russian oil. In fact, India was not such a big importer, but given the fact it's available now at a discount, India has bought a lot, so has China. So as long as these two countries keep on buying, Russian oil is going to find a market. And this impact of this on the financial sector, not for today, we need to discuss, because all this of it means how can you work out money transactions without using the dollar or touching the SWIFT system. So it seems China and India both have been able to do that, or at least are able to do it temporarily.
Some mechanisms,
So this is the other hit that we are going to see, that in targeting Russia, they have actually caused collateral damage to Europe and the European Union, particularly now with the Nord Stream 2 and 1 being sabotaged. Clearly, it was not in the interest of Russia. Though the Western media pretends it was, but it is really against their interest, and they seem to be repairing it, which could cost them up to $500 million. So the $500 million. So looking all of it, it seems that whoever sabotaged the pipelines, this was not in the interest of European Union, particularly Germany, which has an industry which is energy intensive. So European Union is going to take the biggest hit for the foreseeable future, because it will not have a cheap gas on which its entire industry, heating, electricity was being based. They're going back to coal and nuclear quite a bit. So we'll have to see what happens in the future. And of course LNG, which is going to be imported, by also creating much more fugitive methane emissions. So let's see what happens on this count.
All right, just to wind up very quickly, Prabir, and looking forward into 2023, I think as you've kind of positioned the argument, on the one side there is private greed and the profit motive which drives the American thinking as far as this entire energy sector, particularly fossil fuels, is concerned. And the other is the situation that humanity finds itself in. Do you see any movement in terms of the conversation in these regards? Are we likely, or is there even a possibility of seeing a future where the world's interests are put first and the interests of capital second?
Well, I don't think we are in that scenario. And even worse, we are in the scenario where national interests of capital are put before the interests of the people of your own country, let alone the world. So given these two sets of issues, national as well as the interests of capital, we are finding we are probably worse off in meeting the challenge of global warming than we were before. because earlier there was you could argue, a global pressure on the rich countries as well as the energy companies to do something about it. Now that pressure is off because everybody says, well, we have to survive right now. So therefore, let's forget about it for a couple of years, we'll see later. But unfortunately, the clock is ticking at a way that a few years later would just may get you tip over beyond what is feasible to then recover from. So yes, this year the picture is rather grim on that count. I will say that doesn't look good. But on the other count, the realignment politically of the US and European Union, or the what is called the G7, losing political dominance of the world, which is the unipolar world emerging after 1990. And also the power of Asia, but Southeast Asia is a very important player in this. Africa, Latin America breaking free from the United States control, particularly true for Southeast Asia and Americas, Latin America. And then Africa becoming the play between all countries, I think, is a portent that in the future you will get a more equitable political distribution of power. And that unipolar world is really well and truly over. A lot of countries will play their part. But in terms of energy, not such hopes as yet, because we have to solve the key technical problem, which is how to store renewable energy. And instead of focusing on that, what we are focusing on, calling it transitional fuel, calling for sanctions of different kinds, is really distracting ourselves for meeting the real challenge of our times.
Thanks very much for that, Prabir. There you have it, grim reality, but also hope that in the year to come, at least conversations can move forward in terms of a more equitable, at least political distribution and conversations happening. We'll, of course, continue our focus on this sector and the wider implications that it has in the year to come. But for now, that's a wrap for this episode of the Daily Debrief. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for more details on these stories and all of the other work we do. And of course, don't forget to follow us on social media as well. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.